Welcome. Thank you, everybody. My name is Brett Cohn. I'm the president of Think Near by Telenav. I want to thank i612 for having us out here. It's great to be back in Minneapolis. I think we've got a great panel today, so my goal is to keep my comments pretty short. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes or so, just touching some points really around what's happening in the location space today, how location's evolving, and then we'll get to the good stuff. Just by show of hands, how many people here are actively using location for targeting or data analytics or media buys? Pretty good chunk. And how many people do we have on the agency side of the house today? Lots. And the brand side? Awesome. Well, again, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. I'm based out in Denver, and our company's based in Los Angeles, but I get out to Minneapolis usually a couple times a year, and it's not pandering when I say this, but Minneapolis tends to be one of the most collaborative, enthusiastic marketing communities that we visit, so it's always really good to be here. So thanks again for taking time out of your day and joining us. I'll give you the obligatory About Think Near slide, just so you know who we are. Think Near is a location-based mobile advertising company. We are based in Los Angeles. We are a division of a company called Telenav. Telenav is a public company based in Silicon Valley. They have been building location-based services in the marketing and automotive and mapping spaces for about 20 years. So location tends to be in our DNA. And as Think Near, we are the mobile advertising and media arm of that company. But let's start from a big macro perspective. We are a mobile world. We know that mobile is powerful. We've all got our devices with us all the time. Many of us have probably heard the anecdotes and read the stories about how addictive this technology is. There's a thing called nomophobia. This is an actual clinical condition. We didn't make it up just for the slides. And it's that feeling of panic or stress when you don't have your phone. And apparently, 73% of us suffer from that. We look at our phone all the time. We sleep by our phones. We keep it within 5 feet of us nearly all day long. And apparently 20% of people would rather give up shoes than their phone. Luckily, that was not a prerequisite for today's lunch. But these are devices that are with us all the time, and they're a really unique marketing channel. And as marketers, we're spending a lot of money in this channel, 57% of digital, making mobile the largest digital channel for marketing. And that's a big shift. 6-7 years ago, we always talked about how that shift would happen, and now that shift is here. And so we are, as marketers, shifting our budgets, shifting our focus to align with where our customers are spending their time. And so that's a great thing to see happening. And there's always a but, though. Getting mobile right is actually really hard. So we're all spending money there. Our customers are spending time there. But joining the right message and positioning and the context and doing that on a mobile phone is really, really difficult. And part of that is because we tend to think of mobile as another channel, another screen. But it's a lot different than the screens we're historically buying on and planning for. You've got these issues of mobile web versus mobile app. So it's not just mobile as a single channel, but there are sub-channels within mobile that we have to think about as marketers. Those use cases are different. The reporting is different. The technology is different. Measurement is tough. So we could be talking about foot traffic attribution. We could be talking about last touch attribution, multi-touch attribution, mobile cookies, mobile IDs. Measurement in the mobile space is really, really difficult. And that's another challenge for marketers. Also targeting. 40% of marketers say that they have a very difficult time and they're not confident that they can reach their target audience as effectively in mobile as they can in other channels. When you think about multi-location brands, the challenge becomes even harder. Mobile is this personal channel, and as consumers, we've adapted to expect personalized content. We expect the right context. We don't allow for interruptions and disruptive advertising on our phones. It's such a personal experience. And when you think about multi-location brands or CPG products that are sold in multi-location brands, the Best Buy shopper in downtown Chicago is a lot different than the Best Buy shopper in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And customers expect us as marketers to understand that and to give them a message and a product that fits their context and their unique situation. So how does location help with all of this? Well, let's start as a baseline. When we talk to marketers and we ask, is location important? The vast majority of marketers do feel that location and location data is important in the mobile context. The real question is, why is that? And it's a pretty simple answer. It really comes down to the data. And I know a lot of times we think about location-based marketing as geofences and proximity-based targeting, but it's a lot different than that, and the use case has really evolved. When we talk about mobile and all the stats about how we keep the phone near us and how addicted we are to it, I think it's important to kind of think a little bit deeper about what we mean by that. Think about where you woke up this morning. You had your phone with you in your neighborhood, and when you look up and down your street, the people that live on your block oftentimes are similar. That tells us a story about who we are. Where you go to work, where you go after work, to the gym, to a restaurant, where you go on weekends. Humans, by nature, are creatures of habit. Roughly 80% of the places we visit in the real world are repeat visits. Home, work, gym, restaurant, entertainment. We go to the same places over and over again. And those patterns create a stream of data that help marketers understand who we are and what audience we're a part of. And that's really powerful. So as marketers, we have to rethink, how are we addressing that audience? How are we using that data? Because in the online world, the TV world, the print world, we've never had that data before. We haven't had that understanding of what people do in the real world. We've got the understanding of what people do online. That's ubiquitous. But now we've got this new stream of data that really helps us understand audiences, which can be really powerful. So I want to touch on just 3 aspects of how we as an industry are using location. And I think the goal here is really to highlight how we as brands and marketers can use location in new ways beyond that traditional targeting geofence. So 1 is insights and analytics to better understand the consumer. 2 is targeting personalization to make that message more personal and more contextual for that consumer. And 3 is how do we make better creative through the use of location data to build a better customer experience. So I'll start with an example from Denny's. This is downtown Dallas on the map. This is a Denny's restaurant on US 75. That's the yellow line just north of downtown. And rather than just implementing a geofence targeting strategy where you'd say, oh, let's put a geofence a mile or 2 around that store, we wanted to look at the data as part of our planning process to understand where are the customers coming from. And so we looked at the home neighborhoods of people who were visiting Denny's, this particular Denny's restaurant. And that's what the yellow dots represent. And you notice it's not a normal distribution around that geofence. You know, it's clustered. And so why is that? What is that clustering pattern? So this is a overlay of neighborhood block groups based on household income. The pink colors represent a lower income household, and the green neighborhoods are right on the other side of that freeway. That's Highland Park in Dallas, a very Tony upscale neighborhood. And it's pretty easy to see this is not an equal distribution of that geofence. So had that client implemented a just standard geofencing strategy, they would have wasted a lot of impressions where their customers aren't. And a more effective strategy would be to, yes, let's limit the targeting to within a certain distance of Denny's, but let's only hit those neighborhoods where our customers are. This is a good demonstration of how location can be used as a planning tool. Another example, San Francisco. If you do a similar analysis for San Francisco, and you look at what block groups and neighborhoods over-index for nightlife, restaurants, dining, bars, you see most of San Francisco is covered. That tells us something about that audience. If you switch that and say, show me the block groups that over-index for purchasing disposable diapers, baby ointment, they disappear. Nightlife, babies, they don't go hand in hand. I was in another meeting and I showed this slide and somebody said, no, you've got agency world and brand world. Agency world and brand world. I didn't say that, but I thought that was a funny analogy. In that sort of planning data, whether it's used in mobile or used online, it's all taking location data about our context and who we are as people and applying it in the context of a map. And you can do that based on purchase behavior. People that purchase certain types of products tend to live in similar areas. You can do it on demographics. You can do it on visitation data. So there's a lot of different layers you can apply to that. And the challenge is figuring out which layers best apply to your target audience. Switching gears to talk a little bit about targeting. The way we tend to think about targeting is really about, one, where you are, so your real-time context, where you've been, which is your historical patterns, where you've been in the past, and who you are. So again, looking at that demographic and purchase type behavior. When we think about targeting, again, it's kind of going back to that old world of geofencing, new world of using the data to find a specific audience. We continue to focus on maps. So that blob of color on the right-hand side there is a heat map of Los Angeles based on ethnicity. And so we work with a lot of multicultural agencies that are interested in understanding where is my audience. And what you see in that map is that audiences follow natural patterns. They don't follow nice, neat geofences or squares and rectangles. They tend to follow a much more organic pattern. And in this case, you're looking at ethnicities, but you could apply that same type of data to family size, marital status, purchase behavior, household income. So there are a lot of different layers that you can apply as marketers as you're planning to understand your audience and as you're executing a targeting strategy. Another aspect of location, kind of the third tier that we wanted to just touch on, was creative. So we can do all the planning, we can do the targeting, but you still need to execute a good customer experience. And some of this is pretty simple in terms of connecting with your audience. What you're not seeing here is typically when we run location-based campaigns, whether you're a retailer or a CPG product company that sells in retailer locations, you want to help the customer through the experience. You want to tell them how far they are from the store. You want to tell them how to get to a store. You want to tell them if there are deals nearby. And that's a pretty basic but often forgotten aspect of building the creative. Another aspect of creative that I thought was pretty cool, this is an augmented reality ad unit for an auto manufacturer where the consumer is actually able to take their phone, hold it up, and see what that car would look like in their driveway. Capture that picture. Live the dream here, if you will. But it's just a cool example of we're not only blending the data side about who this person is and how they were targeting, but we're also building a really good customer experience. Because as marketers, that is also our responsibility to make sure that what we actually deliver to the consumer is meaningful and fun and engaging for them. I think in summary, what I would leave you with is just a challenge to continue thinking about how we use mobile. It's not just another screen. It is a tool that gives us a lot of unique properties that we don't have in other channels. It's a small screen, but it gives us the data. It's got the phone aspect. It's got the camera aspect. It's got all this interactivity that we can't get with people when they're sitting at their desk or when they're sitting on their couch at home. And so continuing to push ourselves as marketers to think about the experience, the data, the targeting, the creative, all of that goes hand in hand. But the way we are evolving as a location-based industry is enabling a lot of these things. So continue to work with your vendors, challenge them, and think about new ways to connect with consumers. With that, we'll go to the panel.
Short, gotta move this. Woo. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Sarah Zeely. I work at Space 150, the raddest agency in town. Check us out. Very excited about this panel. Lots of location-based experts here, and excited to unpack some of the ideas that Brett brought forth. So we'll just get started should we introduce ourselves real quick? Renee, you wanna start?
Okay, sure. I'm Renee Herman. I am VP of Digital at MediaSpace. I've been there since February. Before that, I've been at quite a few agencies here in the Twin Cities, but I've been planning and placing digital since 1997, so quite a while.
Hey there, Matt Doherty, Place IQ. I oversee the West Coast and also Texas and automotive as a category. And actually before Place IQ, I've been here for about 6 years. Before Place IQ, I was at a little agency here in Minneapolis called FRWD. So mobile practice lead there, and prior to that, really focused on mobile some of the early days. So been at this for some time, so hopefully I have something to bring to the table to say.
Awesome.
Brett, come take care.
I'm Nathan Jensen. I was formerly at IAS and now with Placed, contrary to my truncated bio in the program. But yeah, I've been working in Minneapolis for almost a decade now and looking forward to it.
I'm Israel Alvarez. I'm the VP of Product and Technology for Mobile Fuse, based in Boston. Prior to that, I was working for a political consulting company in the Boston area, bringing technology, specifically location-based and big data, to political campaigns.
Wow. Can't wait to hear more about that.
It's a big step up.
Yeah, welcome to the dark side. Let's get right into it. Would love for you guys to just jump in if you have something you feel passionate about saying. How have you leveraged location data to find relevant audiences for your clients, and how have you seen that impact, and how have you measured it? It's a big question to start out with. Anybody?
So I can talk to that. One of our core products is what we call mindset targeting, and location is a foundational portion of that type of targeting. Basically, mindset targeting is Mobile Fuse is overwhelmingly focused on in-app inventory. We only have like 5% mobile web. The reason why we made that as a conscious choice a number of years back to focus on in-app inventory, because the signals that we get from in-app inventory are much stronger and more reliable than those we get from mobile web. Particularly, we get a unique device identifier, and we also get a large number. We curate our inventory so that we get a high percentage of GPS-derived left logs. That in turn allows us to combine the location signals with local time of day, local weather, events that are happening nearby, whatever, to create a mindset that the user is in. We aggregate those and sell them to our customers. So for example, an example of a mindset might be moms on the go, or happy hour heroes, or weekend warriors. And that sort of allows us, location in and of itself isn't what we're targeting on, but it is the foundational piece of information that allows us to aggregate, to combine with other databases to get a clear picture of where what messaging the user might be receptive to at any given moment.
Has that worked well for your clients?
It's worked incredibly well for our clients and for us. It's, as I said, it's been our core, one of our core products for the past 5 years, I think, and it's been very, very successful. We're already working on sort of the next evolution of it, but it is and will continue to be one of our core products.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I mentioned I oversee the auto category, so we do a ton in Tier 2 automotive specifically. Those that don't know Tier 2, it basically just means regional, right? So local dealer associations pool their money together and use that to better focus their dollars in their markets. So Brett kind of touched on this in the intro. Thinking about location data for a pre-planning tool. So we do a lot around audience discovery. So we notice oftentimes we'll get all these RFPs coming in from different regions from the same brand, and they all have the same brief, right? Same audience, same target audience, same in-market, same competitive conquest pool. But now, as we've gone deeper into working with a lot of these automotives, we've quite simply said, hey, basic intuition tells you that a Toyota visitor in Minneapolis looks very different than a Toyota visitor in Los Angeles, right? Not only their cross-shopping behaviors, but how they use the car, how far they drive to work every day, the amount of traffic they sit in. I can tell you it's significantly worse in LA than here, believe it or not. And what they do with the car on the weekends, right? Do you drive it to the lake or do you drive it to the mountains? So we started looking at what are really the unique characteristics and attributes of each one of these markets and use that as a pre-planning tool. And then we did a bunch of A/B testing to say, hey, what happens when we take your just campaign brief, target those audiences as instructed versus actually using these new audiences we discovered. We saw pretty significant lift consistently across all the markets in those A/B tests, and we've really been able to replicate that and scale it across all the regions that we work with. So.
Awesome. How many versions was that initial test?
We did it in like 3 markets.
But creative versions.
Oh, well, creative sort of the next phase of it, right? This was just tweaking the audience. We've been pushing creative. Creative is it's funny. We feel we're proactively pitching. Hey, we've tweaked the audience. Now let's tweak the creative. But as we all know, I think mobile creative gets pushed to the back burner, and just from an operational standpoint, I think that's sort of the missing link is taking that next step to actually take the effort to tweak the creative as well as tweaking the audience.
Yeah, so we do a lot of healthcare advertising, and we don't necessarily get down to the granular level of neighborhood for this particular client, but we took a look at which DMAs had a higher propensity for a specific disease, looking at CDC data as well as prescription information, and then we targeted those states. Once we ended up getting results, we looked a little bit more granular at which DMAs had the higher prescriptions and went a little more granular to target that way. Our client ended up having an ROI of about 169% higher than their goal. And when they did the campaign with a lot of other media like television, radio, it performed exceedingly well. So, I think you can do general, broad geo-targeting as well and still be extremely successful.
Super interesting.
Yeah, in addition to all of those, I think everybody outlined a lot of great use cases for being on the offense with using location data as it kind of relates to targeting, finding your users. I think geo-targeting and fencing has been mentioned. Even like behavioral segments can be created based on visitation frequency to certain businesses, verticals, and things like that. But even the diagnostic element, and spoiler alert, Place is primarily focused on the measurement aspect versus the targeting and media portion of it. But having an understanding of before and after is really valuable, right? Because you can actually get a sense of like how effective incrementality is or how effective some of these strategies might be. In addition to that, like new store remodels, for example, are a great example. What does visitation look like before we rehaul a bunch of retail outlets or something is a quick example. And then to the creative and the messaging point, a lot of this location data isn't just for the targeting elements. While that's a great use case, you can even pull some of the stuff out of the back end, like, for example, the frequency of visitation to your business or the brick and mortar that you care about can tell you a lot of things about how you should message folks. For like QSRs, you've probably got some folks that visit a Jimmy John's once or twice a week because that's just their habitual pattern, as was said earlier. But you want to message those users very differently from folks that only visit once a month or maybe not at all. If you've got lapsed customers, it's probably a good idea to tailor your strategy accordingly instead of just blunt force targeting. So there's a lot of elements to it, and I think that's another interesting part of how to use location data.
Fantastic. I know we've talked a lot about healthcare, retail, automotive as kind of natural places to to use and for location data for. Are there any other like surprising industries or verticals that you've seen success using location data targeting?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, I mean, I would say all of them, right? So I think, again, Brett touched on this a bit too. You know, we tend to think about, when we say location data, we tend to think about the two major applications, right? Proximity targeting and, you know, the idea of like a foot traffic study or foot traffic measurement. But all those are applications, right? They're just merely applications of the data, and two certainly great ones, and one that most marketers gravitate towards. But when you think about what location data actually is, it's unique signal, right? It's a unique signal about what we do as consumers in the real world. And when you start thinking about what else you can do with that signal, what other applications are there, they're actually quite limitless. So some of my favorite use cases lately that we've done, you know, we've worked with insurance companies to link out-of-home exposure to online conversion, right? So out-of-home, that's a location. A billboard is a location. We can see what people actually drove by and regularly commute past these billboards, and we can link that to the digital behaviors that they exhibit relative to a control group. So it's linking offline to online. We work with financial companies to target new movers. New movers is actually one of our top 3 audiences. It's surprising to us. We get reports, you know, from Oracle and all the DSPs. So just organically, new movers is actually one of our top audiences, because that is a location-based signal, right? You lived here, you showed up here every day, and now you're showing up here. So you think about all the marketing use cases, all the marketers that want to reach people who recently moved. And I'd say my favorite case study that we've done lately was with a beverage brand. I like it because it has nothing to do with either proximity targeting or foot traffic study, where we looked at, they were trying to quantify in some way all the money that they were putting into big stadium sponsorship, and these were, you know, big stadium takeovers, not just like throwing up a banner or something. So we took this location-based behavior of people physically visiting stadiums and linked that to purchase data by integrating our data with IRI, which is CPG data. So again, nothing to do with really even mobile advertising. We looked at all the people that physically visited a place, passed that through to our partner to actually measure against, again, an A/B test to see if there was actually a lift in purchase in store. So I think when you start thinking beyond just proximity targeting and foot traffic studies and think about the unique signal that this data brings, the applications are quite limitless.
Yeah, I would echo what Nathan said. Location in and of itself can be sort of a primary targeting point, but or analytical point. But really, the amount of information that gets derived from the location signal, household income, for example, for most users, that's only going to be derived by their home location. And actually just laying out these patterns visually, I think exposes a lot of other things that might be difficult to derive otherwise. The tools that we have available to us now, I'm a little bit of a data geek, so that's kind of what I gravitate towards. But the mapping tools, for example, even a few years ago, it would have been impossible to show a map with an interactive map with 50,000 data points on it. That's something that's run-of-the-mill today, so that you can actually see and drill down to which, I think you showed the block level maps before. You can do heat maps at block level and get some of those understandings that, hey, because my audience is really not just within 5 miles of the store location, but rather within these very specific block levels, and what does that in turn mean? One of the things that we do at Mobile Fuse is we take that underlying data and create what we call insight reports, which are things, these reports basically take a look at who engaged with your messages, and geographically where those rates happen during the day, time of day of week, where did those happen, to sort of give you a better understanding of your audience and strategies to take away the next time. And I think that location is really at the foundation of all of this. And it's across the board. There's not one vertical that we feel that we've found that's maybe better suited than another. I think it has applicability pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I think going to what Matt said is a great example, using location data in other channels that wouldn't traditionally be associated with this kind of digital forward information, right? Like out of home's a great example. Television's another one where you can use some of this information. You ship it off to LiveRamp or somebody else that can help you make a match, and you can essentially use it for addressable, connected, or even traditional linear targeting. So making television and or I guess older mediums a little more measurable is another cool application. And then on top of that, I don't know if it's just me or us, but I feel like day part and days of week and things like that are starting to have another moment. It's like we've kind of traveled back in time, and understanding like when visitation can occur and the best time to hit users to drive visitation, for example, or when to geofence and things like that is another interesting element.
Yeah, it's no longer when they're watching TV, it's when they're out and about doing stuff,
Yeah, exactly.
running errands. All right, let's take a little flip of a topic and talk about how we're targeting, who's tracking, who's validating all of this data. What do we think the biggest challenges are, and where all this data is coming from, and how it's being sold to marketers? It's a heavy one. Who's going to take it?
I can start a little bit. I think if we talk about mobile data in general, it's a pretty interesting topic, and there's a lot of activity in that space around just data ownership, data rights, data privacy. I think if you look back 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of differentiation in the space came from, I have access to this data and nobody else does, or I have this relationship with this app developer and nobody else does. And that whole ecosystem has changed quite a bit through data marketplaces, where app developers in the past, they monetized based on ads. And then over the past few years, they've realized that I can also monetize by selling my data, and I don't have to sell it just one time like I do an ad. I can sell this data over and over and over again. And that has spawned the creation of these data marketplaces. So in some sense, the availability of data has become somewhat commoditized, and it's more what you do with that data that tends to matter. I'd be willing to bet that everybody on this panel can probably go out and buy the same data from the same vendors, and then it's up to us to determine what we do with that and build use cases and products on top of that. So I think that's one big macro trend that's happening. I think the thing to think about in that context is, well, who actually owns the data, and what rights do we have to that data, and how do we protect consumer privacy in that data? Frankly, I think a lot of that is still to be determined. I think GDPR and CCPA are going to have a big influence on that, but when you talk to most people in the industry, a lot of those standards and regulations don't exist today, even though we're less than a year from CCPA, the California Privacy Act. So a lot of that is still going to be determined over the next probably 12 to 24 months, but I think it'll be a really interesting, an interesting place for both brands, agencies, vendors, and in terms of how we as an industry sort that out. It'll be a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I hate using "it depends" as an answer, but it's really up to everybody in the ecosystem and the value supply chain to have a piece of like the data stewardship that goes along with all of this, right? Because no one person is probably going to have the tech stack qualified enough to siphon it all out, but together we can probably come to a pretty good, accurate source of information. I think everybody's probably got their own secret sauce and little recipe that they'll talk about, but there's not one governing body that's doing a great job of auditing this information. I mean, to be honest, the regulations have been almost non-existent, and the things that are in place are pretty challenging to work with right now. So it's really up to the platforms themselves, the people that are selling it, to do a little bit of QA, kind of look in the mirror, make sure that we're all doing the right stuff as far as collection methods and also repackaging. And I think that when you're using things like floodlight tags and you've got piggybacking, you've got a lot of duplication happening. So on the agency side, that's requiring a lot more man hours and work going into making sure that we're not overlapping with different partners and media sources, et cetera. So I guess the point to all of that is there's a lot of variables that go into it, and it's going to take a lot of work from everybody along the value chain and the supply chain to sort of snuff it all out.
Yeah, and I do want to just emphatically agree, right? I mean, the concept of like data sourcing has 100% in my opinion too, has become commoditized. And I think to take it a step further, what is important and really what matters to marketers, right, is how are you interpreting the data, right? That's where, companies like us, that's where we really develop our own IP around, right? How do you interpret the data, and what products are you offering off of that data? And you as marketers, you actually don't really care or need to care about where you source the data, or do you have an SDK, or what does an SDK even mean, right? That's not your job to be professionals in that. You just want to understand, does this data actually represent reality? That's actually your objective, right? So we used to get all these location data RFIs, and they'd say, hey, tell us how you source your data, and SDK data, background data, foreground data, all these, all this jargon, right? And to be honest, and I put myself, I'm one of the marketers who isn't an ultimate expert in that stuff, and you're asking questions about things that you don't really fundamentally understand. But what you really want to understand is, does this represent reality? And I think the new RFI, which has been a really encouraging trend that's been happening over the last, say, really just a year or so, is we just are willing to provide a bunch of data. We'll offer you the data to look at, and you can interpret, does this actually look real? So we do a lot of what we call truth set analysis, right? So if you have a bunch of data as a marketer that you feel like represents some sense of reality or truth, maybe that's sales data, maybe it's even website traffic, you can actually correlate that against foot traffic to locations, or just audience sizes, whatever it is. Sort of the new RFI has become us sharing data and collaborating to say, hey, take a look at this. Does this actually look real to you? You tell us, and now you can actually make more intelligent decisions off of it. So rather than asking about all the inputs, you're just looking at the output in its sort of raw form. And I think that's been a very encouraging trend, and actually a much more simple way for marketers to evaluate the data itself without having to get into all the data sourcing and whatnot. So I would definitely encourage anybody in this room to think about, as you're evaluating partners and evaluating use cases, actually challenge all the vendors that you meet with to share some data to help you feel good about what it represents.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is, if we're looking to, even DMA target, let's say, we're looking at a partner to DMA target to 10 different DMAs, but then when we go in and maybe we'll pull reports out of Google Campaign Manager, you've got all of these audiences that fall outside of our DMAs. And so it's trying to figure out which data is correct, and how do we course correct that geo-targeting, or figure out where they're getting their data in order to ensure that our audiences are where they're supposed to be.
Any top secret insight from the government?
The only thing that I would say is the correlation between different data sets shouldn't be a given. So for example, Google is a good example. In the mobile space, Google has some limitations in being able to correlate locations. So for example, you say, I think you gave the example of it falling outside of a particular targeted DMA. Mobile, I mean, it's in the name, right? It's mobile, it moves. And that can cause some discrepancies in measurements as Google tries to correlate between them. So that's an important thing to keep in mind throughout, and I think goes back to what everybody here has been saying, is what is truth. I think a lot of people might say that Google is sort of the baseline measurement that we want to go by, but that actually shouldn't be a given. Like every other company, Google has its own limitations that can give you unexpected results sometimes. So being able to go back to the raw data and being able to look for yourself, that stuff, even if it's just a subset of the campaign, I think is very valuable. The only other thing that I would add there is there are sort of two different things that we've spoken about here. I think access to data, but also quality of data. And quality of data, I think, is an important thing. We, for example, we toss out like a third of our bid requests that come in with location data because it doesn't pass our testing for fraud. Anytime that there's money attached to anything in the advertising space, there's going to be fraud that follows it. So the systems that are built to catch that fraud, I think, are also important to look at when you're evaluating your partner.
Yeah, crowdsource from all the platforms you have access to, your ad server, first and foremost, verification platforms if you have them, which I'd encourage, and then your partners, aggregate everything that you have access to and then kind of use it directionally to make the best decision with the data you have.
Yeah, I think another key point is more data does not mean better data. It sounds obvious, but I've gone through RFIs where we've done this where we said, hey, send me all the visitors to these stores and these and these 3 DMAs, right? And they come back to us and said, oh well, we went with this other vendor because their data was better. Well, why was it better? Well, they had more visits. Well, why is that better? And then when we actually encouraged them to go deeper into the DMAs outside of like the big ones like Chicago, Dallas, New York, and we went into the smaller DMAs, our just very simple, rudimentary correlation showed that our data was actually much more consistent with just population size, whereas the other vendor completely fell off the map when you went into these smaller DMAs. So, it's just a very simple story. More is not necessarily better, and quality is important. It sounds obvious, but doesn't mean it's not true, right? So try to find ways to really evaluate the data from multiple angles and challenge vendors to provide it in different ways too.
Fantastic. Do we have time for one more question? We touched on this briefly. Does anyone have a compelling story about how you can use location to complement traditional media such as linear, the original location, out of home, or TV, radio?
Yeah, I think I touched on some of those examples, but TV is huge right now, and I think one of the more interesting things, I mentioned the out-of-home stuff we did in the stadium. It's pretty specific, but TV is super interesting right now, right? Because there's the obvious use case, which is linking, television advertising exposure to place visitation. But I think the more interesting application that's happening now is looking at that in reverse. So now taking this understanding of where people go in the physical world, tying that back to what shows do they watch, and now you're actually looking at this new way of informing TV planning, right? So again, nothing to do with mobile as an advertising vehicle, but using mobile data to actually inform, smarter marketing around the most important still traditional channels.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's unfortunate I keep agreeing with the Place IQ team, but they're making great points. I've probably lost so many negotiations to them, but they're making great points. I think that's a great example, and even using informing your entire plan, right? The TV data by itself in a silo is great, and you can understand some location information and visitation off of programs, day parts, whatever it is. But then tying that into digital and or other channels and looking at the overlap, optimal reach and frequency, and things like that, I think offers a pretty unique opportunity for marketers.
For us, one of the things that we're really interested in is the digital out-of-home space and connecting that to either companion banners that reinforce the message whenever you're near a particular location, a digital out-of-home location, or leveraging things like QR codes so that people can actually engage with the digital out-of-home unit via their mobile device, and consequently we can capture all the information about that particular user at that point in time and create another audience from. That's one of the things that we're interested in. Things like a Times Square billboard that you can use your phone to interact with and play a game with, or augmented reality. We actually built a conceptual unit where it was for Land Rover, and you were able to launch an experience, an augmented reality experience for that particular product right then and there. I think things like that, sort of the combination or the synergy of the different mediums is really where location can become really powerful. If you know that a user is in a particular location at any given time, you can change the message accordingly, either by the dynamic creative that ingests a location signal, or any other number of things. If you know that it's raining in that particular location at that point in time, you can serve an appropriate ad, or any other. From the creative execution point, leveraging a location signal opens up any number of customizable experiences for people.
I think it's a pretty consistent theme here that people view location as being synergistic or complementary to almost every channel. And one of the things we see a lot is people have their budgets in different buckets. We've got the mobile bucket, the location bucket, and TV bucket, and the print bucket. And kind of breaking down those walls between those buckets and figuring out which data do I use across channels, which data do I not. That does take a lot of work up front. And in the marketing space, agency space, we're all crunched for time, we're all crunched for budgets, and finding ways on our teams to even think about that planning and data use up front is tough. But where we see the most success is with the brands and agencies that put that time in up front and are willing to, dare I say it, use non-performing budget, non-media budget to put into the data and the planning. Those campaigns tend to work better, but nobody wants to spend that money. And it is hard to communicate that you're spending media budget on non-media assets. But I think if you do that up front, your results ultimately will be a lot better.
Awesome. I think it's time for audience Q&A. Using this mic.
Okay, does anyone from the audience have any questions?
I like the example with a leveraged location for that beverage company. You guys touched on a few other verticals. I'm really curious to go back to CPG though. Do you guys have any other use cases where location was able to help in some kind of call it a shopper marketing strategy or something where a brand, a CPG brand, wanted to look at implications of sales lift and location was able to help or begin to help provide that?
I mean, I think in its most simple form for shopper marketing, right? I mean, just being able to identify who's the shopper in the household that shops at a specific retailer, right? So if you're focused on Walmart or Kroger, being able to actually identify the shopper in the household, right? CPG has an incredible amount of household level data, but they don't always know who the shopper in that household is, nor where they actually are purchasing. So, and oftentimes CPG data is only tied to one specific retailer or some black box of we don't know where they're buying this stuff. So I think just at a high level, being able to take the data from a household level, which gets you to what are they purchasing, to who's the shopper and where are they shopping, either for targeting or measurement purposes. But then I think just the portability of the data and having it integrated with all the other great platforms you guys already use. I mentioned we do a ton with IRI. So if you know where a device lives, you can connect to that household level data. So we have CPGs, similar to the TV example I used. We have a product with IRI where you can actually go into IRI and define and build audiences based on their location and movement data and use that to better target and augment your CPG segments. So either just connecting an exposure to sales lift or actually using it for audience planning and tons of different applications out there.
So I can describe a campaign that we actually ran recently for CPG. So on the targeting side, we use the location to pull out device IDs of people that frequent the particular brand that we were running the campaign for. So they were part of the strategy, but that segment performed particularly well because we knew that these people historically have been visiting this particular store more than twice a month, for example. On the creative execution messaging side, there was a number of different stores nationwide, each of which ran their own specials. So we consumed an RSS feed of whatever was happening, whatever the specials were at that particular nearest location that was nearest to the user at any given time and highlighted those. And then on the analytics side, we were able to also additionally run a sales lift study, to show to the end user, hey, here's exactly what you got as a result of this campaign. Location is integral to all three of those steps.
Anyone else? Okay, let's give a round to our panel. Okay, we're gonna do raffle prizes. Okay, so Think Near is going to be raffling a drone. Teresa Swigum from Nina Hale. So Placed is raffling a Joule sous vide. Nicole Parsons from Hayworth. Adherent is raffling off a Google Home Hub. Kirsten Erickson from Space 150. Mobile Fuse is raffling off some Apple AirPods. Aaron Lyon from Carmichael Lynch. Thank you for attending our event. Our next event will be Rooftop at Brits next month. Thank you to all of our sponsors.